So, so David Suchet, I have to congratulate you. I mean, what an achievement. 25 years playing Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot, and it ends with Curtain, Poirot's final case. And we want that is such great news for all of us Poirot fans that Acorn, a streaming service in the US, has become involved and it's eligible for Emmy consideration. And it's already, the TV movie is #2 on our charts, and you're
Wow.
rising in the ranks for actor. But we'll talk about Curtain, but we have to go back to the beginning, which I was surprised to find out your involvement with Agatha Christie predates Poirot. In fact, you played
Yes.
someone else first.
Yes. I think you have to go back. I think I shot 13 at dinner in 1985, I think it was, with Peter Ustinov playing Hercule Poirot. And as I said, I played Inspector Jabb. And I'll always remember this film because I didn't know much about Poirot at this time. What I did know is that after this film that I was going to make, that I said I would do, because I was looking forward to being with Peter Ustinov. I was a huge fan of his work. I was just about to leave for Stratford with the Royal Shakespeare Theatre to undertake the role of Iago.
Ah.
And to do a little movie before I went to Stratford for the best part of 18 months, you know, was a really good thing to do career-wise as well, and especially to be in something as popular as I knew Peter Ustinov's Poirot was. And it was a chance to be seen on television in a very popular program. When I was acting with Peter, I remember thinking to myself, God, what a wonderful character he's playing. And I thought to myself, gosh, I wouldn't mind a go at this one day. But,
Okay.
and I remember genuinely thinking that. Never for one moment did I ever imagine that it would in fact come my way.
Right,
But
because you hadn't even at that point read any of the novels or anything. I mean, this was
I was never, and I'm embarrassed to say now, of course, but at that time, I was not an Agatha Christie reader. It just wasn't in my ballpark to read that, to read crime fiction. So no, you're absolutely right, Paul. I was not acquainted with Agatha Christie. I was acquainted with Poirot, though, because I'd seen other people play Poirot, like Albert Finney, who was wonderful in Murder on the Orient Express. And Poirot, for me anyway, at that time, was a well-known character because he seemed to me the most famous character. I'd not watched many Marples, but I had seen Poirot's.
Right. And then, so then a couple of years later, I mean, you do Blot on the Landscape, which is a wonderful comic novel made into a miniseries. And then you get a phone call asking you for a meeting, and they present this idea to you. And so and what's interesting about it, the Poirot back then, is they weren't going to do the novels. They were going to look at do the short stories, 1-hour adaptations of each one.
Yes.
So this was an opportunity to do 10 short stories.
Yes, and that's all I was in. That's all my contract was for. It was to do 10 short stories with a possible option to do more, because there were, I think, 30 short stories in all. But the first lot was going to be the 10 short stories, and we were going to shoot for 6 months. And I was to read the short stories and read the first script when it came in, and then I made up my mind whether to do it or not. And that was the deal. That was it. That was it.
And so you say yes, and then I've been reading about this dossier that you start to compile, and I think this is why you have been embraced by Christie fans worldwide for the last quarter century, is the amount of research, your dedication to it. Because you discover something when you start reading that Poirot isn't who we think he is, who we've seen him be portrayed as.
That's right. I think very briefly, I ought to say the reason that I finally not became an actor, but after about 10 years, my decision to remain an actor was because I suddenly realized that an actor has a very important function, and it has very little to do, as far as I'm concerned, with my own status as a star or ego or anything else. I realized that there are writers who write for their work to be seen and heard rather than those who write for novels. And therefore, my modus operandi, if you like, as an actor, has always been to serve my writer, so that when I approached Poirot, I would do the same work for Agatha Christie as I would do for a Shakespeare play. I would look at the script, I would read the script, I would read the stories, I would read the background, I would look at my script that I had to learn, I would look at the punctuation, but more with Agatha Christie, I would go back to her stories, because my impression and the world's impression of Poirot by the time I took it over, apart from those fans who knew him from the books, was that he was a bit of a joke. That Poirot was just a caricature of this funny little Belgian who was very quirky and amusing and to be laughed at. And I discovered when I started reading the short stories, and I went beyond the short stories, I looked at the big novels to get an overall impression of what Agatha Christie was writing. And I found, when I was reading, I found a character that I'd never seen before. I found more dimensions to him. And I found that he was a character I could smile with because he was wonderfully eccentric, but he was not a fool. And I never felt I wanted to laugh at him. I wanted to smile and enjoy his eccentricities, but I had to take him seriously. Even though he was very egotistic and bombastic and all those difficult qualities that we associate with him, he was never a man to be taken lightly. His intelligence was so supreme. As Christie calls him, he was the walking brain. And this is what I discovered. And I got so excited about this that I decided to go through not only the short stories, but as many novels as I could possibly do, and make a character dossier of all the main characteristics that I could write down. And I made a decision right long before, while I was preparing the role, that I would try and become the Hercule Poirot for Agatha Christie, because she was famous for disliking actors who portrayed the characters that she wrote. And I wanted to serve her and put on screen, even if it was only for 10 short stories, the Poirot that she would have been proud of, because she would have been able to see what she wrote personified by the character that I played for her. And I thought if I got it right for her, I would get it right for millions of her readership, because she was so well known. Her books were only second to the sales of the Bible. So I knew I was dealing with an iconic writer here. So in getting it right for Agatha Christie, I knew I would get it right for her fans.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned that, because of course, Margaret Rutherford having played Marple on film, and then Joan Hickson had done Marple on television, I guess, a few years before Poirot. And I believe that Agatha Christie sort of had endorsed the idea of Joan Hickson, and that, when she'd seen her in something else, said, you'd be a good Marple one day. So it's interesting about the foresight, because she was the best Marple, and then the fact that you're sort of thinking, I wouldn't mind a chance of that. But you couldn't have imagined 10 short stories would turn into a quarter of a century. I mean, so you do 2 seasons of the short stories. And then what I love is that the first time they want to do a feature length is The Mysterious Affair at Styles, the very first Poirot novel.
Yeah.
Yes. How did that feel to get a chance to do one of the novels after the short stories?
I really did consider it the most phenomenal privilege to be able to put on television this iconic novel, her very first novel, that actually launched her.
That's right.
In a way that she never expected to be launched. And in a way, she and I were holding hands, because although the short stories had been very, very successful, I had no idea how a full-length novel translated onto film for me as Poirot. I knew it worked in 1 hour, but suddenly we were doing 2-hour film on her iconic very first novel. And the responsibility, I felt, was huge. But we had a wonderful script, and I was able to do it in a way that her fans accepted. And I'm only, well, I say I'm sorry that Agatha Christie never saw it. I still have slight trepidations about what she would think, but I hope she would have approved.
And then it keeps going and going. I mean, you're the Energizer Bunny of actors in that. So finishing the short stories, and then every few years doing a few more of the feature length, the novels. I know they're at the end. I mean, talk about completists. They take the labor of Hercules and turn that into one of the final things you've done.
One of the hardest novels to do.
Yeah, and you are so dedicated. I mean, I believe you did a reading of one of her radio plays, Black Coffee. You didn't film it, but you know, yet again playing Poirot. So we come.
Yeah, because I wanted to complete the full canon. You see, yes. I was so desperate. There came a point in my life as Poirot, because I never knew from 1 year to the next. I must tell you all this, that I never knew from 1 year to the next whether or not I was going to be asked to continue doing it. It was never a done deal that I would automatically play this character every year. So it enabled me very many times to do other work, like my theatre career kept going, because it wasn't an annual occasion. I didn't know when I was going to play the next Poirot, and if indeed I was going to be asked to play it. So at the end of every Poirot season, in my own mind, that could have been it.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I didn't realize that. I knew there was time off in between, and here I was thinking it's because, I mean, this is the thing about David Suchet. I mean, we love him as Poirot, but if anyone's been lucky enough to see him on stage, things like playing Salieri and Amadeus that gets him Olivier and Tony nominations, and then some of the work you've done in the West End. I mean, this is what I think is fascinating, taking on these iconic roles in great American plays like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Long Day's Journey into Night, All My Sons. Is it conscious? Is it sort of like, I'm going to do something that you couldn't get further away from the portly Belgian detective?
No, I think it's because this is where I am genuinely grateful to my own industry. I started life as an actor in English repertory theatre in 1968. And from 1968 to 1973, I was playing a different character every 2 weeks in the British theatre repertory system. And I knew I was a character actor. I was never going to be a wonderful romantic lead at any point in my career. It was just not in my cards. I was a character actor. And Poirot, for me, was a character. I had to change myself to become him. He was also, fortunately for me, he was a disguise. So that when I finished each season, because the industry knew my other work, and especially my theatre work, which was very varied, they had no compunction in asking me to do some of these wonderful, iconic roles. Because in one sense, and it's a very important thing, although I was famous for Poirot, I was never totally typecast. And that is the gift that my own profession has given me.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I think of somebody on this side of the pond, Angela Lansbury, who sort of gets the fame later in life with Murder, She Wrote. And I think, I'm sure you've got people coming to see you in the theater like she does that didn't know until they read the biography. Oh my goodness, he's done lots of things before Poirot.
Yeah.
There was,
Yeah.
so, but to finishing it up, you come to Curtain. I know that you filmed others after, but that's the one that the TV Academy voters will be looking at, and it's such a it encapsulates so much, and the fact that Hastings is back, the dear Hugh Fraser is back on the scene, and Curtain takes Poirot back to Styles, right, where your first feature-length film, and now you're in his farewell appearance. Just talk to us about that, reuniting with Hugh Fraser, knowing that this was the last screen appearance of you as Poirot.
Well, without being too sentimental, I will say that filming that film, knowing that it was the very last story, that he died in that film, that was the end of the character for me. And I was filming it after a quarter of a century, knowing this man who had become a very dear friend. It was the most disturbing piece of work that I had to approach that in my whole career, out of anything I have ever done, because I knew that even though I had other Poirot films to finish off after, I knew that by dying as Poirot, it was goodbye. It was goodbye to someone I'd lived with, if you like, even though he was fictional. Somebody I had lived with has been part of my life for a quarter of a century. And to say goodbye to him was very odd, because it was me dying as him. And that's a very, very strange feeling indeed. And as I'm talking about it now, I can feel the emotions welling up, and it's over 2 years ago. It was very, very traumatic. And the day that we actually shot his death, I will never forget that day. And the silence in the studio, and the people, you know, hard-bitten filmmakers, you know, off the set. When I came off, they were all, well, most of them were actually crying. It was an extraordinary occasion. I'll never forget it until I die.
And at the end, your last word, the cher ami, and you say that several times.
Yes.
One of them is for Hastings, but the other one is for somebody else.
Yeah, well, it was Agatha Christie writes cher ami, and I said it more than once, because I couldn't help it, and it was me saying cher ami to Hugh Fraser's Hastings, but it was also me, David Suchet, saying goodbye to my dear friend, mon cher ami, Hercule Poirot.
And, you know, he, in that final scene, and instead of reaching for his medicine, he reaches for his rosary. You mentioned before about Agatha Christie, second only to the Bible. Now, in your post-Poirot life, I mean, you tackled, I thought tackling the Agatha Christie canon and doing it over a quarter century was an achievement, but you took on the Bible.
I did, yes. I did. It's something that I, not only because I am a Christian, but it's also something that as an actor, I've always wanted to do, because I think the Bible, it's what it is, the Biblia, or Biblia, it means a library. The Bible is a library of some of the finest written words and books that have ever been put together, and some of the most iconic stories. So it's always been, if you like, an aim of mine at some time in my life to read the Bible. Now, in my early days, I read odd bits for BBC and BBC Radio. I did odd bits. But then I thought, you know, I'm getting on a bit now. And I thought, no, I'm really going to sit down and spend the next few months or year, or actually it was over a year in the end, recording the whole Bible. I want to do it, and this is something I want to achieve. And now that I have done it and I look back, and I suddenly realize on looking back, and it's not until we do look back, it's rather like a spider looking at his web, that we look at our life. And I've suddenly realized that, yeah, as you've said, Paul, there are these two huge monumental tasks, the complete works of Agatha Christie and the complete works, if you like, of the complete Bible. And yeah, I've managed to do both. And aren't I lucky that I've had the opportunity?
Well, no, I would demur and say that I think we're the lucky ones. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And it was such a delight to watch the evolution of Poirot, from the stories to the novel to the films, and then those last ones. And thank you, Acorn TV, for getting them to us here in America, streaming them and making sure that finally you and the rest of that cast and the production can be Emmy eligible. So well, hopefully in July you'll be hearing your name. Thanks again.
Well, that would be astonishing.